Berlin, 1941. The chandeliers were polished brighter than the truth. Cigarette smoke curled through the ballroom like whispered sin, and beneath the laughter of officers and diplomats, a woman in red smiled, pretending she didn't hear the war outside. They said her perfume arrived before she did, that her voice could make men forget the country they served. But the truth was simpler and far more dangerous. She wasn't there for champagne or charm. She was there for secrets. Every dance she accepted was a question, every glance an answer. And somewhere between the waltz and the whisper, she began to dismantle an empire. No one knew her name. To the Germans, she was temptation wrapped in silk. To the Allies, she was Cynthia. To history, she was almost invisible. But on nights like this, when Berlin shimmered and bled at the same time, she wrote the war's fate with lipstick, deception, and nerve. Because in a world built on violence, she discovered something deadlier than bullets: desire, seduce, spy, sabotage. 3 words that became her religion and her curse. She was the woman who wore red and spoke to Hitler's men. If you've ever wanted to hear what history sounds like in the dark, stay close. This is where untold stories breathe again, the spies, the soldiers, the secrets the world tried to forget. If you want to step behind the curtain of World War II, into the rooms where silence was deadlier than bullets, subscribe now. Because every week, another truth surfaces, and once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Washington, 1939. The city glittered with the illusion of control. Men in tuxedos discussing Europe as if it were an after-dinner game. Women wrapped in silk laughter that hid the scent of fear. Beneath the chandeliers and polished silver, Amy Elizabeth Thorpe smiled for the photographers and wondered what it felt like to do something that actually mattered. She was 28, married to a man she barely recognized, and celebrated by people she secretly despised. Her beauty was famous, her charm rehearsed, her opinions politely ignored. Every ballroom felt like a cage made of crystal, transparent, dazzling, and impossible to escape. Amy wasn't naive. She read newspapers others pretended not to. She could see Europe cracking at its edges, feel the tremor in the air each time a diplomat toasted peace. The world was sliding toward something dark, and all she could do was dance. That night, at a British embassy gala, she met the man who would change everything. He wasn't like the others. No medals, no arrogance, just a quiet intensity that made the noise around him seem irrelevant. He watched her the way a mathematician studies a code. When she finally approached, he didn't compliment her dress or her eyes. He simply said, "You notice what others overlook. Have you ever thought about doing something dangerous?" For a heartbeat she laughed. But he didn't. He handed her a folded card with no name, only a number. "Call when you're ready to stop pretending," he said, and walked away. That night, Amy couldn't sleep. The words replayed in her mind, steady and quiet, like the ticking of a bomb she didn't yet understand. Stop pretending. Days later, she did call. The voice on the other end offered no welcome, no introduction, only a location and a time. She arrived at a small townhouse far from the embassies and marble halls. Inside there were maps pinned to walls, photographs marked with red string, and the faint smell of ink and cigarettes. A man in a tweed coat stood beside a radio, studying her like an equation he might finally solve. "Mrs. Thorpe," he said, "we're building something fragile, a network of eyes and ears. We need people who can enter places others can't. You have access, intelligence, and a certain unpredictability. Will you help us?" Amy hesitated. Not because she was afraid, but because she felt alive for the first time in years. The air in that room vibrated with purpose. She asked no questions, only, "What would I need to do?" The training was discreet but brutal in its simplicity. How to memorize without writing, how to smile while lying, how to vanish in plain sight. She learned to turn conversation into reconnaissance, to flirt without attachment, to see every handshake as an opening. They taught her how to decode a message from the rhythm of a waltz, how to signal information through the color of a flower pinned to her gown, how to hide fear behind amusement. "You must be the performance," her handler said, "and never let the mask slip, even when you start to forget who's beneath it." Weeks became months. Amy's old life dissolved quietly. Parties turned into operations. Gossip became currency. She discovered how easy it was to trade truth for access, and how thrilling. One evening, after another successful test mission, she sat before a mirror in her empty apartment. A single red ribbon lay beside her passport, the one stamped with her husband's name, a name that now felt borrowed. The city outside was calm, but she could already hear the war approaching, distant yet inevitable. She took the ribbon, wound it between her fingers, and held it to the candle flame. It curled, blackened, then vanished in a wisp of smoke that smelled faintly of roses. Her reflection watched without blinking. For the first time, she didn't see a wife or a socialite. She saw something sharper. A woman built for risk, for shadows, for the game men thought belonged only to them. She opened her passport, and with the corner of the burnt ribbon, drew a line through her old name. Then she whispered the one that would replace it, slow, deliberate, dangerous. "Cynthia." The word lingered in the air like a promise, not the name of who she was, but of who she had decided to become. That night, the city slept under its fragile peace. Amy didn't. She sat by the window until dawn, watching the first pale light creep across the Potomac. Somewhere across the ocean, nations were arming themselves with tanks and guns. She would go to war differently, armed with charm, wit, and the audacity to deceive. By sunrise, the transformation was complete. Amy Elizabeth Thorpe was gone. Cynthia had arrived, and the world was about to learn what one woman, unafraid of danger, could do. London was grey, cold, and brutally honest. Nothing about it resembled the polished warmth of Washington. The air smelled of rationed cigarettes and rain-soaked stone, and the faces she passed each morning were carved with quiet purpose. Cynthia felt anonymous here, and for the first time she liked it. Her handlers didn't treat her like decoration. They treated her like a tool. The training began in an office that didn't exist, behind a door that had no name. Inside there were no uniforms or salutes, only notebooks, radios, and men who spoke in code even when no one was listening. "Rule 1, said her instructor, a pale man with ink-stained fingers. "You are what they need you to be. Nothing more, nothing less." He taught her to dismantle a lock in silence, to read a cipher as if it were a confession. She learned how to burn paper so that the ashes told no story. The lessons came fast and without sympathy. They told her to smile, but never too long, to flatter, without sincerity, to listen more than she spoke, and above all, to be forgettable until the exact moment she needed to be remembered. Her beauty, once ornamental, became tactical. Her charm, a device refined and weaponized. She studied the psychology of power, how people reveal everything when they believe they're being admired. The training rooms were small, but the world outside them was shrinking faster. France was falling. London was blacked out at night, the sky humming with enemy aircraft. And yet, inside those walls, the future agent known as Cynthia was being constructed with quiet precision. They made her practice invisibility, walk into a room and vanish into its rhythm, speak without drawing attention, watch without being noticed. When she erred, her tutor would only say, "You were seen," and that was enough to make her start again. In time, they trusted her with small assignments. Meaningless errands that were anything but. Dropping envelopes in flower shops, memorizing faces in hotel lobbies, pretending to know nothing while absorbing everything. Each task ended the same way, a quiet nod from her handler, approval unspoken. Then came Rome. The city was still pretending the war would spare it. The cafes overflowed with officers in immaculate uniforms, the clatter of cups mixing with rumor and arrogance. Cynthia arrived under a different name, in a world that felt both beautiful and corrupt. Her target was Minor, a naval attaché who loved art, poetry, and the sound of his own certainty. Her mission was to listen, to gather what he didn't mean to reveal. The meeting was arranged through a dinner invitation. She wore ivory silk, not red, subtle, unthreatening, yet impossible to ignore. He noticed her before she spoke. They talked of literature, the sea, of nations pretending civility. He underestimated her instantly. Over the following weeks, their meetings became routine. She learned his schedule, his opinions, his weaknesses. Every compliment he offered was a thread she quietly pulled. Within a month, she could finish his sentences, and knew which ones mattered. One afternoon, while sketching near the Tiber, he mentioned a shipment, a convoy leaving Naples under special protection. He didn't see her pause, didn't hear the shift in her breathing. By nightfall, that detail was coded into a message sent through London's channels. The convoy never reached its destination. Cynthia read the report days later. The satisfaction startled her. She told herself it was victory, but what she felt was something darker: power, control. She had crossed a line she could no longer see. Rome was indulgent, intoxicating. The danger made everything vivid. Food tasted richer, laughter sharper, nights longer. She knew she should feel afraid, yet she felt alive in a way she hadn't known existed. The fear became part of the thrill. When her assignment ended, her handler met her in a quiet apartment overlooking a city she'd learned too well. He didn't congratulate her. He didn't have to. "You did well," he said, pouring her a glass of whiskey. "You learned quickly." She smiled, the same way she had learned to during interrogation drills. Neither gratitude nor arrogance, just acknowledgement. The handler leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Remember this," he said. "Every secret you steal will cost you a piece of yourself." Cynthia looked out the window. The streets below glowed in the warm haze of dusk. Couples strolling, soldiers laughing, the world pretending not to be collapsing. She raised her glass. "Then I hope I have enough pieces to spare." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both knew that no one ever truly walked away from this life whole. That night she left Rome under a false name, carrying nothing but memories and the weight of her own growing confidence. The plane lifted into the darkness, the city fading behind her like a dream she wasn't sure she'd had. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and felt the first quiet ache of what her handler had warned her about, the invisible price of deceit. Power, she realized, was more addictive than any pleasure, and she had only just begun to taste it. Vichy, France, 1941. The city wore civility like cheap perfume, masking the stench of occupation. Beneath the banners and parades, collaboration thrived in whispers. Cynthia arrived under a new identity. Her accent softened, her smile precisely engineered. Her mission was simple in words, impossible in execution. Infiltrate the Italian embassy, locate the naval cipher, and disappear without leaving a trace. The embassy sat on a quiet street, its facade draped in flags that looked cleaner than the men who served beneath them. Diplomats came and went with practiced charm, each carrying rumors heavier than their briefcases. Cynthia studied them from cafes, memorizing faces, habits, and weaknesses. She already knew who mattered: Colonel Ricci, naval attaché, a man revered for his intellect and despised for his loyalty. Their first encounter was orchestrated, not accidental. At a reception thick with cigarette smoke and string music, she brushed his sleeve while reaching for a glass of champagne. The touch was fleeting, deliberate. He turned, mid-40s, confident, polite. Not a monster, not a fool. "Pardon," she murmured, her voice an invitation disguised as apology. He smiled. Forgiven instantly. Their conversation began with formality and drifted toward curiosity. He asked where she was from. She offered half-truths with perfect timing. He spoke of art, she of politics, never too opinionated, always intrigued. When the orchestra shifted to a waltz, he extended a hand. She hesitated just long enough to make him wonder, then she accepted. That dance was the beginning of everything. Over the following weeks, their meetings multiplied. Luncheons that stretched into afternoons, private concerts, drives along the river. He was intelligent, ambitious, lonely. She saw it immediately. Loneliness, she had learned, was the easiest door to unlock. Yet something unexpected had happened. Behind the espionage, the deceit, the scripted charm, she began to see the man himself. He spoke of his wife in Milan, lost to illness, of his doubts about the war he served. He wasn't cruel. He was convinced, and that made him dangerous. She reminded herself of her task. Every shared glance was strategy, every brush of fingertips a transaction. Still, when he smiled, part of her wanted to forget why she was there. They met in galleries, pretending to admire paintings while trading pieces of truth wrapped in fiction. He quoted Dante. She countered with Wilde. At night, she recorded every detail, every name mentioned, every stray remark, every pattern of security. The codebooks existed. She had seen them locked inside a safe behind his office wall. To reach them, she needed absolute trust. So she crafted intimacy like a weapon. Late dinners turned to confidences over wine. He confessed frustrations with superiors, fear of German oversight. She offered sympathy seasoned with suggestion. "If only your leaders trusted you," she said once, touching his wrist. "Men like you could end this madness." He looked at her for a long time before replying. "And what would you do, Signora, if you had that power?" "I'd use it," she answered softly, "before it used me." Each conversation drew them closer to the precipice. The boundaries between truth and fabrication thinned until even she wasn't certain which emotions were real. She told herself it was performance. Yet she caught herself memorizing the way his eyes softened when he spoke of peace. Still, the mission moved forward. Her handler's messages arrived in flowers and folded menus. She read them at night by candlelight, the flame flickering across her reflection in the mirror, a woman divided between affection and duty. The embassy became a stage. Guards nodded to her with respect. Secretaries whispered about the colonel's mysterious guest. The more visible she became, the safer she was. No one suspects a woman, everyone sees. Then, one evening, Ricci invited her to his study. Rain drummed against the windows, thunder swallowing their silence. He poured wine, his movements slower than usual, his eyes heavy with something unspoken. "Tomorrow," he said, "I leave for Paris. Only a few days." She smiled. Then tonight must last longer. When he left to fetch a record from the next room, she rose, walked to the wall behind his desk, and traced her fingers along the seam of the hidden safe. She counted her steps, noted the sound of the lock turning. Every detail mattered. By the time he returned, the record was spinning, filling the air with a melancholy waltz. She let him lead her into the rhythm, each turn measured, each breath calculated. Inside her mind, she was already transmitting the report. That night, in a small rented flat, she composed the message in invisible ink, each line precise and cold. Access confirmed. Codes behind inner wall. Study of Ricci. Safe type. Italian military issue, double lock. The roses are opening. The time has come. She watched the letters vanish as the ink dried. For a long moment, she stared at the blank paper. Her heart beat steady, but her chest hollow. He thought he was falling in love. She knew she was falling into history. The invitation arrived in silver ink, a celebration at the Italian embassy to honor visiting officers from Berlin. To everyone else, it was another night of civility in a war without mercy. To Cynthia, it was the finish line. Inside that building, behind a wall she had already mapped in her mind, lay the cipher that could change the balance of the Atlantic. By dusk, the city shimmered under drizzle. The streets glistened like black glass, the lamps haloed in fog. She dressed in crimson silk, the first time she'd worn red since Berlin. The color felt heavy on her skin, not seductive, but fateful. At the embassy, chandeliers blazed, violins wept. Every guest carried a smile that didn't reach the eyes. Waiters glided through the crowd like ghosts, balancing trays of champagne that fizzed like distant gunfire. Cynthia entered last, her steps unhurried, her confidence deliberate. The colonel noticed immediately. "Signora," he said, bowing slightly. "I feared you would not come." "Then you don't know me well enough," she replied. He offered his arm. She accepted, and the dance began, literal and otherwise. Upstairs, in the quiet above the orchestra, 2 British agents slipped through a window left unlatched by one of her messages. They moved like shadows, guided only by the faint pulse of their watches. Down below, Cynthia kept the colonel's attention fixed. Their steps followed the rhythm of a waltz that was far too slow for the tension in her chest. His hand rested against her back, steady, trusting. She hated the warmth of it. "Do you ever tire of these performances?" she asked, her voice casual. "Always," he said, smiling. "But it's the only theater we have left." She laughed softly, enough to make him believe she was comfortable, yet every second dragged her closer to disaster. In the study above, the agents reached the safe. Metal met metal. The first lock Surin rendered. The second resisted. They worked quickly, gloved hands slick with sweat. Cynthia glanced toward the staircase. 2 guards stood near the base, their conversation drowned by music. She needed the colonel's focus on her, entirely. "Dance with me again," she said suddenly. He raised an eyebrow. "We already have." "Then dance until you forget." He obliged, intrigued, unaware. The tempo lifted. Strings soared. Around them, uniforms blurred into color and motion. She smiled through the ache of fear, the taste of metal on her tongue. Upstairs. A click, faint but fatal. One of the guards turned, brow furrowed. Cynthia saw it instantly. The guard began to move toward the stairs. Panic would have undone everything. Instead, she let her knees soften. Her glass slipped from her fingers, shattering across the marble. She gasped once and collapsed into the colonel's arms. The room froze. Gasps, chairs scraping, someone shouting for air. The guard stopped halfway up the steps, turning back. The music faltered. "It's nothing," the colonel said, lowering her gently. "She's fainted. The heat." Cynthia fluttered her lashes, feigning disorientation. Her pulse raced, but her breathing stayed measured. "I'm all right," she whispered. "I shouldn't have skipped dinner." He helped her stand. His hand brushed her cheek, a gesture so tender it nearly broke her composure. The agents upstairs seized the moment. The final lock gave way. Inside the safe, the cipher books gleamed under flashlight. They worked fast, photographing pages with a hidden camera. Each frame a bullet fired for London. By the time Cynthia steadied herself, they were already gone, out the window, into the storm. The orchestra resumed hesitantly. Laughter returned, brittle but sufficient. The colonel insisted on escorting her to a quieter room. "Rest here," he said, guiding her to a couch. "I'll have water brought." She caught his sleeve. "Stay." He hesitated, then sat beside her. Silence stretched. Rain tapped against the glass like a secret knocking to be let in. "I frightened you," she said softly. "For a moment," he admitted. "But I couldn't imagine losing you like that." She smiled, small and tragic. "You won't." He didn't understand. He never would. When he reached for her hand, she let him take it. His fingers were warm, steady, alive. Somewhere outside, the agents were running through the alleys. The stolen code pressed against their chests. The war was shifting, and he was unknowingly part of his own undoing. He held her hand like a lover. She knew he was holding the hand that doomed him. Later, when he walked her to the door, the air between them carried a strange stillness, half affection, half oblivion. She looked back once, memorizing the scene, the soft lamplight, the piano restarting, the man who believed in her lie. As the car pulled away, she exhaled slowly, letting the mask dissolve for the first time that night. Her pulse steadied, but her stomach churned with something that wasn't triumph. Victory didn't feel like winning. It felt like falling. and landing on someone else's ruin. The message she sent before dawn was brief, stripped of emotion, efficient as machinery. Package secured, contact compromised, extraction unnecessary. Then she set the pen down and stared at her reflection in the darkened window. Somewhere beneath the red dress, beneath the perfume and the pretense, there was still a woman. But she was fading. Outside, the first light broke across the rooftops. The mission was complete. The cost had only begun. The storm broke 2 days later, not outside, inside her. News arrived quietly, carried by a messenger who didn't meet her eyes. The colonel had vanished. His car was found abandoned near the border, his name whispered in Gestapo briefings. No body, no farewell. Only silence, the kind that confirmed the truth without proof. Cynthia read the report once, then folded it neatly and slid it into a drawer. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Somewhere in France, a man she had destroyed was running for his life, or already dead because of her. She tried to tell herself it had been inevitable, necessary, strategic, but each excuse rang hollow, echoing through the empty apartment like an accusation. At night, she couldn't sleep. The ceiling seemed to breathe above her. When she closed her eyes, she heard his voice again, gentle, unguarded, asking questions that no longer had answers. "What would you do, Signora, if you had the power to stop this madness?" Her answer haunted her now. "I'd use it." And she had. London welcomed her return with quiet admiration. She stepped off the transport plane to polite applause and perfunctory congratulations. Men in grey suits shook her hand, repeating the same phrase. Excellent work. Outstanding results. In official reports, her mission was labeled a decisive intelligence victory. The stolen cipher saved convoys crossing the Atlantic. Ships that would have sunk reached port. Thousands of sailors lived because she had worn red and lied beautifully. That should have been enough. It wasn't. Her apartment in London felt like a borrowed shell. Expensive, comfortable, soulless. Flowers arrived daily, anonymous gratitude from admirers who knew nothing about her. She drank too much, laughed too loudly when company called, then fell silent the moment the door closed. The mirror became her worst enemy. It didn't lie. Each morning she stared at her reflection, waiting to recognize the woman who'd once believed in purpose. Instead, she saw calculation. Her smile had lost its warmth. Her eyes, their hesitation. The office sent new assignments, small tasks, code reviews, surveillance coordination, but she completed them mechanically. The thrill was gone. So was the conviction. Her handler noticed. One evening he stopped by unannounced. Rain traced lines down the window as he set a file on the table. "You've done more than anyone expected," he said. "I didn't do it for applause." "Good," he replied, lighting a cigarette, "because there won't be any." He paused before leaving, studying her face. "You should rest. You look thinner." She smiled faintly. "Lying burns calories." He almost smiled back, then extinguished the cigarette and walked out. When the door clicked shut, she poured another drink, whiskey this time, no ice. The burn in her throat felt honest, at least. The next day, a newspaper headline caught her eye. Allied convoys safe from German U-boats. Major breakthrough in naval intelligence. No mention of her, of course. There never would be. But she traced the headline with her finger, whispering names she would never know. Men alive, because one man she had can, read for wasn't. That night she dreamed of the embassy, of champagne and violins, of the colonel's hand steadying hers as she pretended to faint. She woke with the taste of salt and copper in her mouth. Tears, blood, memory, indistinguishable. The days blurred, letters went unanswered. She stopped attending briefings. When she did appear, her perfume lingered longer than her patience. The younger recruits whispered that she was cold. They were wrong. She wasn't cold. She was cracked, and trying not to break. One evening, she sat before the mirror again, a ritual she could not abandon. The city outside pulsed with blackouts and air raid sirens, but she didn't move. She opened a drawer, pulled out a tube of lipstick, the same shade she had worn in Vichy. The red looked darker now, almost brown under the dim light. She uncapped it slowly, twisting until the tip rose like a blade. Her hand trembled once before steadying. The first touch of color on her lips felt foreign, almost violent. In the reflection she saw not glamour, but aftermath. The red glowed like blood against pale skin. For a long moment she held her own gaze, searching for something human in the eyes of the spy she'd become. There was nothing. She set the lipstick down beside her glass and whispered into the quiet, as if someone might still be listening. "I won the war they gave me," she said, "but I lost the one I never understood." Outside, the air raid siren wailed, a city bracing for destruction, while she sat perfectly still, painted, unshaken. The world would never know the cost of her triumph, but she did. She leaned closer to the mirror and drew one final line with her fingertip across her reflection's mouth, erasing the color, smearing red into a ghost of itself. Cynthia, the woman who had saved thousands, stared back at Amy, the woman who could no longer save herself. The difference between them was paper-thin, and covered in the same shade of crimson. Rain turned the streets into mirrors, each puddle reflecting a world she could no longer inhabit. The Gestapo had begun to move, quietly, efficiently, like wolves circling prey that had already bled. Names were vanishing from lists. Safe houses once secure now stood empty. And somewhere in that tightening net, Cynthia had become a liability. Her handler's message was short. "Leave everything. Go now." She packed in silence. No photographs, no letters, no trace of the woman who'd existed here. The red dress, her emblem, her armor. She folded once, then fed to the fire. The silk curled and blackened, flames licking away identity. The room smelled of smoke and perfume, an obituary written without words. She stepped into the storm before dawn, coat collar up, hat pulled low. Paris was already awake with fear. Trains hissed in the distance. Soldiers patrolled corners with eyes that saw too much. Every face she passed might have been her betrayer. Every sound felt like pursuit. At the station, she moved through the crowd like a rumor. There, then gone. A woman handed her a ticket beneath a newspaper, eyes never lifting. Another brushed against her sleeve, murmuring a single phrase. "The river runs south." The code for change trains at Lyon. Each transfer brought new danger. A conductor's glance lingered too long, a soldier's question hovered too close. She smiled when necessary, lied when required, and prayed only when nothing else worked. By nightfall, she reached the borderlands. Rain had turned to mist, cloaking the countryside in ghostlight. Her last contact waited in a dim cafe, a man with ink-stained hands and an expression carved from exhaustion. "You have 2 hours," he said. "After that, the patrols sweep the valley." "Spain?" she asked. He nodded. "If you're lucky." Luck, she thought, had long ago changed its allegiance. The crossing was brutal. Mud sucked at his air boots. Wind shredded her breath. Somewhere behind her dogs barked. She forced herself not to run. Running drew attention. Instead, she walked steadily, like a traveler with purpose. When the lights of the French side finally disappeared, she allowed herself a single breath. On the other side, a Spanish farmer met her by the road, his truck idling under trees heavy with rain. "No names," he said. She nodded. They drove in silence. Hours later, the truck stopped near the coast. The horizon glowed faintly, neither dawn nor night. She stepped out, water dripping from her sleeves. The farmer handed her a passport and a new name, meaningless, temporary, perfect. "From this point," he said, "you never existed." She looked out toward the Black Sea and whispered to no one. "They taught me how to disappear. They never taught me how to live with what I've done." Behind her, Europe burned. Ahead, the neutral silence of exile waited, cold, forgiving, indifferent. By morning, she was gone. The network she'd built was erased, replaced by new faces, new code names, new lies, files stamped. Cynthia was sealed, misfiled, forgotten. History moved on, efficient in its amnesia. The woman who had stolen nations' secrets dissolved into myth, leaving only a trail of ashes where her life had once been. She had become what every spy fears most, a ghost who survived her purpose. The war ended without her. Cynthia heard it not from a messenger, but from a radio crackling in a cafe on the Spanish coast. The patrons cheered, glasses collided, strangers embraced as if the future had suddenly remembered them. She sat in the corner, hands wrapped around a cup gone cold, listening to a voice declare victory in a dozen languages she no longer trusted. For the first time in years, there were no coded phrases to decode, no names to protect, no lies to maintain. The silence that followed peace felt heavier than the noise of war. She rented a small room overlooking the harbor. Pale walls, one window, one chair, one bed. The simplicity unsettled her. After years of chaos, order felt like confinement. She filled notebooks with words she never intended to send, letters to London, to her handler, to a man who no longer existed except in her memory. I did what you asked. I did what I had to. I did what no one will ever thank me for. She tore the pages afterward, careful to scatter them, so no sentence survived intact. Habits die slower than wars. The days stretched thin. Fishermen shouted at dawn, radios hummed with Reconstruction news, church bells tolled for both the dead and the newly hopeful. She walked along the waterfront to stay invisible. Just another foreign woman waiting for a boat that would never come. Each morning she bought the paper and read it twice. Once for the world's news, once for the emptiness between lines. Nations rebuilding, treaties signed, generals honored. Not a word about the woman who had slipped into embassies wearing red, who had stolen a code that saved thousands. She had never expected glory, but she hadn't anticipated this kind of erasure. A vanishing so complete, it felt like punishment. At night, she left the light off and wrote again, words that belonged to no audience. I stole secrets, but I lost myself somewhere between. In them, the ink always smudged before it dried, as though the paper refused confession. Sometimes she dreamt of the colonel, not the mission, not the betrayal, but the sound of his voice saying her name as if it meant something. In the dream he never accuses her. He simply turns away, disappearing into fog that smells faintly of gunpowder and roses. She always wakes before she can follow. The world outside grew louder as hers grew smaller. Children played in streets where soldiers once marched. Flags returned to balconies. Life, relentless and indifferent, moved forward. One evening she stood on the balcony watching the harbor lights blink against the dark. Boats came and went. Commerce, not combat. The air was clean again, but she no longer trusted purity. Every quiet moment felt borrowed. A young couple passed below, laughing, their hands intertwined. For a moment she envied their simplicity, then pitied it. Innocence, she knew, was a luxury only the ignorant could afford. She went back inside, poured herself a drink, and faced the mirror. The woman reflected. There seemed almost gentle, older, softer, anonymous. She wondered if she could still summon Cynthia with a touch of lipstick, a tilt of the head, the right inflection. She didn't try. Peace had no use for her. The skills that once turned danger into triumph now felt absurd. How to lie, how to vanish, how to make someone trust you just enough to destroy them. In the distance, the church bells rang again, slower this time, solemn. She closed her eyes and whispered into the emptiness. Wars end for nations. They never end for those who fought without uniforms. The words hung in the air like smoke, curling, fading, leaving nothing behind. A few weeks later she packed her things, what little she had left, and boarded a train bound south. No one asked for her papers. No one cared who she was. From the window she watched the sea retreat, the waves gleaming under morning light. Somewhere across that water, the world celebrated freedom. She felt only distance. By the time the train reached the next town, she had decided she would never speak her true name again. Cynthia, the spy, the lover, the liar, all of them belonged to a world that no longer existed. She had become a weapon without a war, forged for a purpose that peace had erased. And as the train vanished into the horizon, she realized that surviving was not the reward. It was the sentence. The file arrived in a brown envelope marked Declassified, Restricted Review. The historian slit it open carefully, expecting pages of detail, but found only fragments, half a dossier, yellowed photographs, a few telegrams fading to ghosts. At the top of the first page, one word appeared in black type: Cynthia. The handwriting on the notes was small and deliberate, cursive that looked more like art than intelligence work. In the margins were phrases underlined in red pencil: roses, embassy, cipher recovered. Nothing else. No birth date, no burial record. Just the outline of a legend, erased by time. He turned a page and found a single sheet that didn't belong. Heavier paper, perfume faint, but still present. The words shimmered under the light. I did what I was asked, and more than anyone will ever know. There was no signature, but the slanted lettering carried personality, a voice half remembered through history's static. The historian leaned back, the ticking clock echoing in the quiet room. Outside, the world moved with the indifference of peace. Cars passing, children laughing, a century that had forgotten its debts. He imagined her, somewhere between the lines, neither hero nor traitor, a woman who had rewritten the rules of survival and disappeared before anyone could thank her. He flipped to the last photograph, a blurred figure stepping onto a train, face hidden beneath a hat brim. The caption read only, Marseille, 1945, last confirmed sighting. He whispered the code name aloud, tasting the syllables like an invocation. Cynthia. The sound filled the room for a moment, then dissolved. He glanced again at the file, at the red underlines tracing across otherwise empty pages, and smiled sadly. They said her perfume arrived before she did, he murmured. But history took its time to notice. He closed the folder, pressing it flat, as though silence were the only fitting tribute. Somewhere far away, unseen and unmarked, her name might still linger in forgotten ledgers, etched in invisible ink, carried by the ghosts of a war that never quite ended. And if the world ever looked close enough, it would find her story written not in medals or memorials, but between the lines, in gestures, in whispers, in every secret act of courage done without permission. The file returned to the archive shelf, swallowed again by dust and decades, but her legacy refused to stay buried. It lived in the quiet knowledge that wars are not won solely by soldiers. Sometimes they're turned by a woman in a red dress who understood how power truly works. Seduce, spy, sabotage, 3 words that built an empire of silence. And one woman who wore red, to remind the world she was never invisible. Another secret fades into silence, but history never truly sleeps. If this story left something in you, share it in the comments. Tell me what lingered. And if you want to hear more truths, more courage, more forgotten souls, subscribe and stay with us. The next story is already waiting in the dark.